Oh. Yeah, no, I'm not doing that.
Fine.
That's great. Once you start talking, I get my. Just think the New York.
You'll be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, yeah. Just remember. Slow down. Yeah. Take your arms. Yeah. And tell your story. Oh, it'll feel good for you.
Yeah, you're gonna be so happy. Be very proud of you.
You ready, guys?
Do you want us to do a welcome before you?
You sign us up.
No, she's gonna do a intro,
Oh,
but
okay.
do we want to do a call?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
Alright.
What's that?
Lights are.
Yeah.
I'll shut them off.
We're done.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you guys for coming to the Lakeshore Water Summit. My name is Dr. Rick Hine,
I'm Dr. Becky Adler.
and we are just the welcome crew. So we are gonna pass it off to Amy Lentz from Lakeshore Natural Resource Partnership, who is one of our really important community partners, and she is gonna introduce her stream team.
Yeah, hi everyone. Like Rick and Becky said, thank you for coming tonight. My name's Amy Lentz. I've now been at LNRP for 2 years, but this project is really near and dear to my heart because when I was in grad school, I actually worked with the stream team, kind of compiling data, which is what led me to LNRP, which is what led me to being in this room here. So we've been Lakeshore Natural Resource Partnership and our partner group, Friends of Hika Bay, have been helping support this initiative for over a decade, long before me, obviously, as you can see, I'm so young. But this group has done a ton of really great work, and I am really excited for you guys to see all they have accomplished.
All right, well, I will let us start off here. So thanks again, everyone, for coming to the Water Summit presentation. We should probably go ahead and introduce ourselves. My name is Ashley Minch. I am a major in environmental science, and I'm also going to be minoring in environmental engineering technology.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caleb Newberry. I was one of the field coordinators for the project this summer, and I'm a major in environmental science as well.
Hi, my name's Karen Bergen. I was also a field coordinator. I'm majoring in biology with a minor in early adolescent education.
Hi, I'm Timber Cott. I am a environmental science major. I was in charge of QA/QC, which will be explained later on.
And then I'm Morgan Burnside. I was the lab coordinator over the summer, and I'm a double major in environmental sciences and then biology.
Awesome. All right, I should probably add I was also lead data analyst. Forgot to say that there. So, all right, let's begin. So, over the summer, we looked at water quality in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin. We sampled 3 different watersheds to assess pollutants in and entering the streams and their impact on water quality in local areas. These watersheds range from urban to rural, and we do aim to answer 3 questions. How does rain impact water quality? How does land use impact water quality? And how does restoration efforts impact water quality? And it is important to remember, everything that we're testing does lead into Lake Michigan. In other words, one of the important laws of ecology is everything is connected to everything else. So just something to keep in mind going forward. So before we really go in depth, I do just want to give everyone an introduction to our sites that we sample. So I will start by saying this star right here is the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay Manitowoc campus. This is where we are currently, and this right here is Lake Michigan. So we sample every Monday, and then we also sample within 24 hours of rain greater than or equal to ½ inch of rain. Going forward, we are going to call these our rain events. So we test 3 different watersheds. Starting out, we have Little Manitowoc up here. This one flows through the city of Manitowoc. This one only has 4 sites. Little Manitowoc 5, 3, 2, and 1 that flows into Lake Michigan. This is our northernmost and most rural, site. Or sorry, urban, thank you. Next up, we have Pine Creek. This one is going to be right here. This one is more southern of Little Manitowoc. This one has 8 different sites here, and they're pretty scattered out, given that the stream has a lot of, branching ones off of it. And then lastly here, we have Centerville Creek Watershed. This one is our most rural and also, our most southernmost site. So this one actually consists of 3 main areas. We have a southern branch here, and then we have a northern branch here, and then those eventually converge and then lead into the restoration area. All right. So moving on to our water quality test, we have field test, and then we have tests where we take the water back into the lab, and then we do further testing there. So starting with our field equipment, we have a flow meter. This essentially measures velocity in feet per second. In other words, how fast is the water moving? So to do this, we place the meter in the stream with the black sensor facing upstream at about mid-depth, and this is usually where flow is best represented. We test this because it impacts erosion rates, and it's also not limited to how fast nutrients and pollutants can be carried downstream. I should also add that velocity, we usually find that it is faster right after our rain events, as it's pushing a bunch of water into our streams. All right, moving on, and we have dissolved oxygen. So we test this in milligrams per liter, and this same probe actually tests water in temperature in Celsius. To do this, we just fully submerge the sensor in the water, and it gives us what we need right there. So low dissolved oxygen is harmful to aquatic life. Like us humans, most forms of aquatic life cannot survive without oxygen. And I should point out too that we do have a surface water standard of greater than 5 milligrams per liter, where we like to see dissolved oxygen above this number, as it is one of the signs of a healthy stream. So more field equipment and test. I would hope that everyone here knows what a meter stick is. Those of you who do not, no judgment. We use it to measure depth in the stream in centimeters. So we do this by simply putting the meter stick in the water, taking the measurement of how high the water stands. Next up, we have E. coli. So this one is measured in CFUs, which doesn't matter what a CFU is. All you need to know is this is basically a unit of measurement that tells us the concentration in the stream. Let's see where it was here. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what E. coli is or where it comes from, I did get permission to say this. Poop. It comes from poop. E. coli is only found in warm animal guts. It should stay in warm animal guts, but we do find it in our streams, disgustingly enough. It does not survive that long outside of that, depending on the environmental conditions. So we test for this by adding a reagent to the stream sample, incubating for about 22 to 26 hours. The reagent then binds to E. coli, and that combined with incubation causes E. coli to glow under UV light. And we test for this because it relates to safety. Are these waters safe for public activities? And this leads us to our surface water standards. 0 to 234 CFUs is open. Feel free to use these waters. They're completely safe. Once we get to 235 and 999 CFUs, it's an advisory. You should probably be a little more cautious using these waters. Wash your hands. Don't know why you wouldn't to begin with, but and then lastly, closed, greater than 1,000 CFUs. Do not even think about going in this water. It is not safe whatsoever. Closed. So I should also add too, E. coli does have a detection limit of 2,419.6 CFUs. This basically means that the highest number that we can read is 2,419.6, but the actual levels could be greater than this number. So now we get into our lab equipment and test. So here we test for turbidity. So we measure this in NTUs, which tells us the concentration of suspended particulate matter. We test for this by putting a small sample of the stream in this thing called a turbidimeter, which just uses a ray of light that goes through, and then this tells us how turbid the water is. We test for this because it does affect sunlight penetration in the streams. I'm sure most of you here have heard of photosynthesis. Aquatic life does need light to grow. And then we also test for this because certain pollutants and nutrients can also bind to this matter. And I also thought it would be helpful to provide a visual here. So on the left, we have 12.7 MTU water, and then over here we have a reading of about half that, and you can see that there's a pretty great visual difference between the two of those. All right, so moving on to ammonia, we measure in milligrams per liter for ammonia and ammonium. We use something called a hot kit to test for this. We basically just add some reagents to the sample and it'll turn green. And then the hot kit will tell us the ammonia concentration. And then based on that color and then some calculations to make it more accurate, we use pH, temperature, and the hot kit ammonia readings, and that gives us some more accurate reading of ammonia and ammonium in milligrams per liter. We test for this because it is linked to decomposition, sewage, and agriculture, also because it is essential for plant growth, but not in excess. Kind of like how cake is good for our happiness, but not in excess. So we test for this because ammonia is toxic, and you're probably wondering, well, what about ammonia? Why do we test for ammonia? So in streams, actually, ammonia and ammonium can actually convert between forms. All right, so next up, we test for pH. This is basically the acidity or basicity of the water. We basically just place a pH probe into the stream sample, gives us what we need right then and there. We test for this because it can influence ammonia. And another fun fact is rain can actually lower pH because rain has a pH of about 5.6. All right. Moving on to phosphorus, this is one of the most important parameters that we test for as it is a limiting factor in surface waters. This is measured in milligrams per liter, and this includes total phosphorus and dissolved phosphorus. So dissolved phosphorus is what is not bound to particles, but free floating, so what the plants can actually use. Total phosphorus includes the dissolved phosphorus, but also what's bound to the particles. So over time, this can become available to the plants to take up as well. We test for this by adding reagents and then heating it up really hot. And then we add some more reagents, which then turns the sample blue. And then we put this into a machine called the spectrophotometer. And this gives us a reading based on how dark that blue color is. This reading has a corresponding phosphorus concentration after some calculations, and that's what gives us our milligrams per liter in phosphorus. And we test for this for numerous reasons. For one, phosphorus is impacted by runoff and does lead to algal blooms. For every 1 pound of phosphorus, it can lead to up to 500 pounds of algal growth. Just to put that into perspective for you. And then this is also why Green Bay is called Green Bay, because the algae turns the water green. Interesting. And then this does also have a surface water standard of less than 0.075 milligrams per liter. And we do point this out on some of our graphs going forward. All right, so before I hand you off, it is important that I do explain QA/QC. This stands for Quality Assurance and Quality Control, and it is a procedure designed by the DNR that allows us to assess accuracy, reliability, and consistency of the reagents and data that we collect. With these results, we can more easily troubleshoot in times of possible error, whether it's due to humans, equipment, or some certain water variations. And then when we do take this sample, it is important that they are side by side and at the same time because we do compare QAQC to actual results in the field.
Okay, so I am going to be covering rain and land use. So this is just a small part, but it's very important to understand. So the first thing that we are going to look at is this nice little rain diagram over here explaining the water system. So what we are simply more main focused on is surface water. So we are going to be looking at the precipitation, how it affects the land and how it directly runs into the lake. We are not necessarily going to be looking at the watersheds too much, pretty much what is in the ground. That is very hard to determine and look at. So we are mainly going to look at surface water in this presentation. So starting off, we are going to look at E. coli, which, as said before, comes from poop, unfortunately, and is very dangerous to humans. So we actually care about it quite a lot. So for starting to understand the graphs, we have this awesome bar that runs across. This shows what is rural and what is urban. There are 3 colors in the background. These are the detection limits. So this bottom color across all the graphs is the open. The middle one is advisory. The top one is closed. You can already see some concerning numbers. So then we have rain events, which is in the blue. Those are the 1/2 inch or higher within 24 hours. And then we have the non-rain events, which is 1/2 inch or lower over an extended period of time. The axis is measured in the CFUs for E. coli, and then the x-axis is what the sites are. So as we look, we notice that for the non-rain events, Little Manitowoc is much nicer. They're very close to the open limit most of the time. Whereas if we wander on over to the Centerville, which is the most rural, they are most of the time in the advisory or even closed, even at a non-rain event status. Surprisingly, during rain events, it's the opposite. Little Manitowoc is at our detection limit all the time during rain events. Surprising, where we would expect that normally to be seen in Centerville due to all the runoff coming off of farm fields. But as you see, only about 1 or 2 are actually at the detection limit. All the others are lower than the detection limits. The next important thing that we have to understand is the phosphorus cycle. So very similar, we get phosphorus comes from plants, which animals eat. Animals end up pooping, which then gets into our soils. We like to use the animal fecal and poop for fertilizer, and that also can get run off with rain into all of our surface water sources. Another one that it comes from is from our soil. That can get eroded by rain, by just large amounts of water, which is where we come in with the flow. So large amounts of water just running off, you get those little stream trickles where you can see where the water has traveled that carry those particles into the water. So we are going to be comparing total phosphorus. So we are going to look at the one with the particles. So the one with the soil particles in there, and then, my bad. Then we have the turbidity. We are comparing that to turbidity because we care about what those particles are carrying. So as we look between the two, we notice that Little Manitowoc is on the bottom. The pink line is the standard that we are testing for. And then again, the red is non-rain events, blue is the rain events. So what we notice is in phosphorus, Little Manitowoc is very friendly. Most of them during non-rain events are just slightly above the standard or at the standard, where if we look compared to the turbidity for non-rain events, still very relatively low, the water is relatively clear. Compared to that of Centerville, the non-rain event is very high above the standard. And that correlates with the high amounts of turbidity in the stream. You can see during rain events, as the turbidity gets risen up from the large amounts of water, pushing more soil and sediment into the stream, you can see phosphorus slightly goes up. You can really see that for the Centerville, where the turbidity at one point got all the way up to 70, which is, you couldn't even see through the water, it was brown. And then you can see these phosphorus levels are extremely high. Extremely, extremely high. So again, another comparison kind of showing the same thing, this time directly between rural and urban. So as we can see, again, Little Manitowoc being the blue, Little Manitowoc's the blue in this instant, is very low, generally below the standard. And as you can see up here, this one was surprising. Up here, what we saw is actually Little Manitowoc for turbidity was worse. So this, in this instance, this is not what we would expect. We would expect, since the turbidity is high in Little Manitowoc, it should be, the phosphorus should be higher down here. So that was something that we were surprised about, because as you saw on the other slide, it did not follow those trends, but in these ones it does. Other than that, there is a, not surprised, a much higher phosphorus average in Centerville than Little Manitowoc due to the more farm use. So we talk about why this might be happening so we're gonna start off with urban for E. coli. This could be because there could be contamination in the water catchment systems, which is a huge one. So sewer systems, water collection systems, anything like that. For rural, the E. coli might be high from contamination from animal waste or even septic systems that might be going bad. For urban, the turbidity could be higher due to road runoff and erosion just around everything. For rural, for turbidity, again, land erosion is pretty common. Wherever it rains, you're gonna have land erosion. And then in stream erosion, we tend to see a lot where the streams like to meander and change shape a lot. For urban, for phosphorus, we see a lot of plant and leaf litter. So like during fall, we see a lot of leaves collecting in the rain systems and sewer systems, road salt, and then also fertilizer coming off of lawns and farms. For rural, for phosphorus, we see a lot coming from pesticides. So any pesticide that is used on a field, we see, again, a lot of septic systems go off and bad. And then again, fertilizer. Someone fertilizes their field, it rains. You're going to get phosphorus in those water systems. So there are a few practices that people are doing to try and help this. This is not a end-all solution, but it definitely is helping. So for city, more urban areas, people are doing green infrastructure, it's called. So there are rain gardens, which filter the water that comes off the roads and everything, allowing it to go cleaner into water systems, permeable soils and pavement, green roofs, and then landfills are being reworked to be more green. There are a few farm practices. Soil management is a huge one. Cover crops, so they plant another crop to hold the soil in place to mitigate soil erosion. There's crop rotation, reduced or no-till fields. Irrigation water management is getting better. Grass waterway, which you can see you can see on the right, they leave a strip of grass on either side to try and hold those erosions in place and collect those unwanted nutrients. And then another huge one is restorations.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, so next up, we're going to look at the Centerville restoration area. And this happened or started in 2012. And we're going to explore some ways that we can measure its impact over the last 12 years. So just to orient yourselves, up here is a map of Centerville Creek. You saw this before at the beginning. This top branch right here is going to be our northern branch of Centerville Creek. Below this is our southern branch. And then where they meet and combine, this is going to be our restoration area. So that's what we'll be talking about when we go over the restoration. But first, what even is a restoration? Well, the goal of every restoration is to return a stream to a balanced state. Often this is by mimicking nature. And a restoration varies greatly by its budget and then the goals of the restoration. It can be as simple as removing stressors to the stream, such as culverts or agricultural fields, or it can be a complete remodeling, reconstruction of the stream channel. That second option is what they ended up doing with Centerville Creek. You can see up here, this first picture is during the early stages of the restoration, when they were just starting to regrade and restore the channel. And then the picture on the left here, or your right, I suppose, is what the stream looked like during our sampling, so 12 years later in 2024. Now, for this specific project, the goals that they had set are listed right up here. Goal number 1 was to reconnect the floodplain with the stream, and we'll talk about floodplains in a little bit. 2, remove invasive species and reestablish native vegetation, make the stream more aesthetically attractive, increase accessibility to the stream, and lastly, improve aquatic habitats. So when would you decide if a stream needs restoration? Well, first you have to understand what a healthy stream looks like. Healthy streams do undergo changes over time. All streams are dynamic systems and they will change. However, this change is relatively slow. We're talking maybe a few inches per decade. They have a wide diversity of habitats and a wide diversity of substrate or bed forms to support a wide variety of organisms. They have an intact floodplain and they remain imbalanced. Now, an unhealthy stream that might be considered for restoration, it would go through much more drastic changes. So it could be as dramatic as feet per year in change. It is detached from its floodplain. It does not have a diversity of habitats, and it is not in balance. When we talk about balance, we're mainly talking about the balance of sediments in the stream and nutrients in the stream. Oh, and then real quick, these 2 pictures up here, this is just the area in Pine Creek. This is what it looked like after a rain event. So that happened within 24 hours. You can see it flooding over the side. And then this is a culvert that restricts flow at another area in Pine Creek. All right. There you go. Okay, and then just some things to keep in mind as we go through. So streams are impacted by and respond to the climate and the weather we experience. And we've had an increase in rain and an increase in intensity of rain over the years. You can see that in this top graph right here. We've had this increase in rain. And particularly pay attention to the difference in rain between 2024 and in 2022, because we'll come back and talk about that later. And then the other thing is there's a lot of other factors that will drive our climate and weather. A very unique one that's very interesting is the seasonal behaviors of the lake. They drive our behavior of climate quite a bit. It's one of these examples is it's well documented that ice cover on the Great Lakes has been decreasing for quite a long time. There's a lot of interesting interactions between the behaviors of the lakes and our climate. A great resource I discovered is going to be GLISA. It's with the University of Michigan. If you're interested, I'd highly recommend writing that down so you can learn more about this interaction. So we're going to go ahead and start our evaluation of the impact the restoration has had. Now, goal 1 of the restoration is to reconnect the floodplain with the stream channel. So what is a floodplain? So a floodplain is the area around a stream that will flood during heavy rain or an increase of water into the streams. Floodplains are important because streams undergo a lot of change during periods of heavy rain or increased water. You can see here that the picture on this left here is a picture of our Centerville Creek, not during a rain event. And you can see this area of it is above water. Within the same summer, there's the same area that was once above water. Now it's about up to my chest after a rain event. Now, when you have a healthy floodplain or an intact floodplain, this water is able to spread out And this allows the water to slow down and not move as fast. When the water is able to flood, it is able to carry less sediment and it is able to do less erosion to the banks. And then one interesting thing down here is you can see that this is a picture of before the restoration when we did sampling. And you can see how high the banks are on either side. So this would be a great example of a stream that is disconnected from its floodplain. Because if this stream were to flood, it's not going to be able to go anywhere. It's just going to go straight up, get deeper, and its velocity is going to greatly increase. Now, because when water during rain events, when water is not connected to a floodplain and its velocity increases, it's able to carry more sediments with it. We're going to go ahead and look at turbidity to evaluate this first goal of the restoration, since turbidity is the measurement of sediments within the water. So you're going to see a lot of graphs that look like this. Quick explanation of them is this x-axis down here is upstream to downstream of all of our sites. Each site on this map was assigned a number that coordinates to the graph. And the numbers are based on how much upstream or how much downstream it is. So for example, let's do these first 2 points right here. This point and this point is going to correspond to these two sites because they're the furthest upstream site. When we get to the end, this last point is going to be our last site closest to the lake because it's our most downstream site. Now this green line represents our Centerville southern branch, which is going to be that lower line down here. The purple represents our northern branch, which is the top line up here. And the blue is our restoration zone. So the 3 sections that are where the stream combines. Now, when we look at these graphs, we're going to go ahead and focus in on 2022 versus 2024, because we have that data on how much rainfall we got. Now, in 2022, if you remember, we did not get a lot of rain. We did not get a lot of rain compared to 2024, where we got a lot more rain. Also in 2024, the rain we did get was a lot more severe. We got a lot more rain in a shorter amount of time when it did rain. But knowing these facts, when we look at these 2 graphs of turbidity, you can see they look very similar. Now, this is a good sign that the restoration is maturing and being able to handle this increased rain and this increased intensity of rain, because if it wasn't, we'd expect this bottom graph of 2024 to look a lot worse than our top graph of 2022, since we've had so much more rain. And then just real quick to explain this y-axis here, this is just a measurement of turbidity. Turbidity is measured in NTUs. Unfortunately, there's not a much simpler way to define NTUs, except NTUs is a measurement of turbidity. Yeah, just trust us. All right. So the graphs that we looked at before, that was for our non-rain events. Now, non-rain events does not mean no rain at all. It just means that we didn't get that ½ an inch of rain within 24 hours. So now we're going to go ahead and look at when we did get over ½ an inch of rain or more within 24 hours, which would be called our rain events. So again, we're just going to go ahead and focus on the graphs 2022 and 2024, because we already have established the cumulative rain and the rain intensity difference between those 2 years. Now, if you look at 2022, you can see that in the restoration, our turbidity increased to a higher amount than the sites upstream of this restoration. Whereas in 2024, even though we still had an increase within the restoration, the overall amount of turbidity was not greater than the other streams, the other sites downstream of this. Also, an interesting trend you can see is this U-shaped pattern of turbidity within the restoration. There's a lot of different reasons that we might be seeing this pattern. One possibility is we know that there's a storm drain in between these 2 sites here. So that might be increasing our turbidity between those last 2 sites of a restoration. So now we're just going to real quick do a quick comparison. So we saw from the pictures earlier and the graphs earlier that rain increases turbidity. But I just wanted to make sure you guys understood how much rain increases turbidity. So because the graphs that we were looking at earlier between the non-rain events and the rain events, they had different y-axes since the amount of the amount was so different. So here, those y-axes are just normalized, and you can see how much higher our rain event turbidity is compared to our non-rain event turbidity. So now that we've looked at turbidity to try to get a little more in depth on the floodplain of our restoration, which was goal number 1, we're now going to go ahead and talk about goal number 5 of the restoration. Goal number 5 was to improve aquatic habitat conditions within the restoration. There's many different ways that you could do this. You could provide habitat. You could restore that diversity of habitat in the stream. You could improve water quality, and there's many more things you can do. We're going to specifically look at improving water quality because we can look at excessive phosphorus in the water. Now, excessive phosphorus can lead to algae blooms and explosive growth of algae and other aquatic plants. This can lead to a decrease in dissolved oxygen, which is very important for aquatic animals. And excess algae can lead to habitat degradation. For these reasons, we're going to go ahead and look at phosphorus to evaluate the aquatic habitats within our restoration zone. So here is our first set of graphs. Now, these are very similar to our turbidity graphs, where we organized our sites using the same system. So once again, this green line up here is our southern branch. So this bottom line on our map. Our purple is our northern branch, which is going to be this top line on our map. And then the blue is our restoration area. So the three sites where these two branches converge. Now this line at the bottom, this is going to be our phosphorus standard that Ashley talked about earlier in our introduction. This phosphorus standard is 0.075 milligrams per liter. And you can tell right away that all of our phosphorus data is higher than the standard, unfortunately. And then what we're looking at with these graphs is total phosphorus. So that is, once again, phosphorus that is bound to other molecules. So it's not immediately available for organisms like algae to use. And so we'd expect this to increase with turbidity. So we'll look at that in a minute. However, for our non-rain events, you can see that our phosphorus in the restoration is very stable, and it's maintained the same pattern for the last 4 years. So we're not really seeing much increase or much decrease. It looks like the creek is doing a very good job of maintaining and handling this phosphorus, especially when we look upstream and see how much higher it can be at other upstream sites compared to our restoration. So now let's go ahead and look at our rain events with total phosphorus. Now, if you remember, since total phosphorus is bound to sediments, and sediments can get eroded or washed into our waterways during heavy periods of rain, we'd expect our total phosphorus during rain events to be higher. So let's go ahead and see if that's true. There we go. So as you can see, surprisingly, it's not significantly different than our non-rain events for total phosphorus. Even though we are seeing a slight increase in some areas, we're seeing that same pattern that we saw with turbidity, especially in 2024. It's still overall a very low value and a very stable value within the restoration. So then let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit more, and we're going to directly compare our total phosphorus to our turbidity. So for our non-rain events, once again, just our data that is not collected after we got over half an inch of rain within 24 hours. You can see that even though our turbidity is increasing slightly in the restoration during these times, we're not seeing that increase in our total phosphorus. In rain events, once again, we're seeing that U-shaped pattern where the turbidity is increasing towards the end of the restoration. Like I said, this could be for a number of reasons. One possibility is that storm drain that's leading in between these sites. But if we look at our total phosphorus, we're not seeing that pattern as intensely over here. So even though it looks a little similar, we're not seeing as much as an increase in total phosphorus with an increase in turbidity as we'd expect. So now that we've talked about total phosphorus, we're going to go ahead and look at our dissolved phosphorus. Once again, these graphs are organized in the same way, where we have our dissolved phosphorus on our y-axis that is in milligrams per liter. On our x-axis here, the streams are organized in the same way, and we have the same phosphorus standard at this red line here. Once again, our phosphorus is higher than our standard, pretty much universally. But you can also see that our dissolved phosphorus in our restoration is once again very stable and has been consistently low throughout the years. So not much change, especially when you look upstream and you see that there is some change in our dissolved phosphorus. But once it hits the restoration, it is very stable and it does not, it's relatively low compared to our upstream values. Now let's go ahead and look at our rain event data for our dissolved phosphorus. And once again, we're seeing that same thing where our dissolved phosphorus in our restoration is low and it is stable. So all of our phosphorus so far in our restoration, both total phosphorus and dissolved phosphorus, has been low and stable in our restoration. So this is a really good sign that once again, the restoration is maturing and it's able to handle excess nutrients being put into the system. So then lastly, let's go ahead and compare our turbidity to our dissolved phosphorus in Centerville Creek. So once again, you can see that our total dissolved phosphorus is very stable, not increasing much. Our turbidity is increasing, but we'd expect it to not be impacted too much from turbidity since this is dissolved phosphorus and it is not bound to molecules. Same thing with our dissolved phosphorus during rain events and our turbidity during rain events. We're seeing that same pattern. Now, if you remember back at our total dissolved phosphorus, when we did the comparison between turbidity and total dissolved phosphorus, it does not look very different from these graphs up here. This is more indication that phosphorus in the restoration, especially total phosphorus, is not being impacted by turbidity as much as we'd expect, which is pretty interesting. All right.
So we are gonna talk a little bit about, before we get myself this little site here, CN10. So you don't need to know anything really about its location. It's in Centerville Creek, but it is a more rural area. So CN10 was interesting, and because of this, we considered it a hotspot. Now, hotspot is a really important area because it allows, it's more of an indicator of what could continue to be monitored, or a potential spot for restoration in the future. And because it was a hotspot, we actually broke it into multiple sites. So CN10 is our main sample site. That was the one that we started with. And off of that, we delegated it into an outfall, a bridge, and a residential area, because there are two branches of Centerville Creek that come together, and CN10 is after they converge. So what we are looking at with the outfall versus upstream. So the outfall comes off of a tile line, it comes off of a rural field. And data supports that the outflow quality was actually higher than the upstream quality, which is a really good indicator that the tile lines are working. So it had lower phosphorus, E. coli, pH and ammonia, and it had a higher DO, which are all indicators of a really healthy stream. I would like to note that if you look at the data down here, it looks really confusing. I just need you to watch the blue lines for me. So we're looking at the outfall, total dissolved phosphorus, and the total phosphorus. So it's gonna be those two blue lines. So there is a spike on 6-24. We did notice that there was spraying activity. And as mentioned previously, spraying activity can lead to an increase in phosphorus. But the really cool thing is you can see it does come back down where it's supposed to be, and it is lower than any of the other sample sites. So that's a really good indicator that it's doing its job. Now, obviously, nothing is perfect. So we're gonna look at the pros and the cons of tile lines. So a tile line is essentially plastic tubing 3 to 5 feet under the field with drainage offsite, which is what creates our outfall.
So the pros are there's less surface runoff and there's deeper root penetration, which is really, really good for farmers. That means less irrigation, less cost. There's less surface level erosion as well, which is also very good for the stream. The cons is there's a lack of control of what goes into the water and it can pull nutrients out of the soil, which is increasing the amount of particulate matter that is in the water. So then we are going to look at our problem child. So this is why it was considered a hot spot. So CN10 had really, really high E. coli, and we could not figure out for the life of us why. So I'm gonna walk you through the process of how we came up with our hypotheses, and how they were debunked or proved. So there was a hot spot we initially noticed under the bridge. This is gonna be closer to the residential area. So the hypothesis was that there were algae mats that were harboring E. coli under the bridge. So you can see that there are these mats on the side of the bridge. And now this is important because E. coli is killed by UV light. So the algae mats grow big enough that the E. coli can populate inside of them and be protected from that UV light. So there was also periodic blooms of red algae in the area, which was slightly concerning. However, E. coli dropped in the following weeks in that specific spot, so the hypothesis was disproved. So moving on to our secondary hypothesis, a big key player in figuring out where these spikes are coming from is taking land use into account. And because this is a more rural area, you do have to consider that they might have farm animals. So runoff from residential property could be causing increased E. coli. On the sides of the Centerville Creek here, there were these, it sloped down here. We believe that during rain, it could have caused, if they had a manure pile up there or if they had livestock, that could cause E. coli to wash into the water. We did a quality assurance test at Klessigs, which is a farm that's further upstream. It was the most accessible point for us to get to. However, it was dried out, so we ruled that it could not be coming from them, which meant it was coming more so from this site itself. However, E. coli peaks traveled downstream before settling at the upstream testing site, which I know sounds really confusing, but I will explain that. So, the upstream testing site is right on the other side of the bridge. It's closer to the outfall and the actual testing site. So our final hypothesis is that there could potentially be a septic tank leak with the property. I would like everybody to keep in mind that this is a hypothesis. Please don't go cold calling anybody. It does need more testing and further assurance before this is proved. But upstream sample sites consistently tested higher in the following weeks, so it was deemed to be the point of origin, which is where it's coming from. Now, there was no visible tank on the property, so we believe it could potentially be underground. This is a very common issue with underground septic tanks. When they get old, they rust, they start to leak. It gets into the groundwater, which trickles into the stream. So we came to this conclusion because the upstream site, if you look, so we're gonna look, this is the average of E. coli through the 12-week span, excluding rain events. Upstream is consistently higher, average-wise. And then if we look over here again, at this visual, the residential site had an average E. coli of 830.35. The bridge had an average of 923.1, but the upstream had an average of 1,422.7. To give you an idea, we had to do dilutions for the E. coli to get it below the detection limit and then recalculate how high that was. So that's why we believe that it could potentially be a septic tank leak, but this is a great area to carry over for next year to kind of do some more testing on that. Okay.
All right, and I promise there's no graphs in my section. All right, so Timber earlier showed us the trends that we observed in urban and rural land use. We saw that rainfall is driving E. coli and that urban sites are more affected by this than our rural sites. This is showing us the differences between the land and that our restoration and land use practices for those lands have to be different. So Morgan walked us through what goes into establishing and maintaining a restoration. We saw that an excess of phosphorus can indicate poor water quality, as it's spiking algae and lowering our dissolved oxygen rate. Increased algae production can lead to that habitat degradation over time. We also were noticing that with an increase of rainfall, we were seeing an increase of phosphorus, but that wasn't necessarily leading to an increase of turbidity, which is showing us that some of our restoration sites are reaching maturity, even with our excessive weather patterns that we've observed in the last few years. Karen, she just took us on a journey to find out the source of our irregular data from our Centerville Northern Site 10. Finding outliers like that is essential for analyzing a system as a whole. Each year, finding these outliers helps us find new solution and new opportunities for the future projects. All right, and a few overall closing points to leave you all with. Continuing to monitor our restoration sites is very important. As we learned earlier, restorations can take decades, if not longer, to reach maturity. And even while they are reaching maturity, it's good to maintain a stream health over time to make sure that everything is working properly. Our data set this summer is a very limited window. Every year, each stream team is contributing to a larger database, which gives us opportunities to come at the project from a new perspective each year. Okay, not a graphic. So this is something to just leave you guys all with some interesting irregular data that we saw. We didn't go too deeply into it, but just thought it would be something interesting to share with you all. So we see here, where's the button? The laser button? I don't want to turn it off. Okay, great. Okay, so we saw here that in our Centerville Southern site, specifically Centerville site 14, that we were seeing an increase in our total phosphorus with our non-rain compared to our rain events, which is completely the opposite of what we'd expect. Now, there are some irregularities to that data. You can see down here, we see that same trend in 2021 and then 2023, but not necessarily in 2022 and 2024. So this is something that we will look at next year in the project and try to figure out why this is happening. All right. We want to give a big thank you to everyone who made this project possible. It's definitely a small part of a larger piece. To Amy Lentz and Jim Kendler at the Lakeshore Natural Resource Partnership, big thank you to you guys. You couldn't have done it without you. And of course, Russ Tooley and the Friends of Hika Bay, which we'll touch about in just a minute. Our professors, Richard Hine and Rebecca Abler, we couldn't have done it without you, with days of equipment not working and not knowing where to go. You guys were really essential in getting that whole presentation done. So thank you, big thank you to you guys. And of course, our funders, we can't do it without you guys. So the Wisconsin Sea Grant, the Wisconsin DNR, and then the West Foundation, big thank you to you guys. To Mark Zygmunt and to Jane Solkowski and Tammy Shalton of UWGB Manitowoc as well. Thank you so much for everything that you guys did for our project. And of course, a big thank you to everyone who let us sample their land. We couldn't have done it without you guys. Big thank you to you guys. Now, we just wanted to take a minute to talk about Russ Tooley. He's been essential in this project the last couple of years, and he unfortunately did pass away this summer. Thankfully, his wife was able to write a very, very beautiful speech about what the project meant to him, which I'll go over with you guys real quick. Okay. In 1962, Russ began his career in computing at the Alice Chambers in West Dallas. The computer room was run on thousands of punch cards. His fascination and love of computing lasted for his entire life. But in all his work, Russ's major focus was on using the computer as a tool to help people solve their problems and make life better. When Russ retired, he didn't stop working. For his last 20 years, he worked on water quality issues with the Lakeshore Natural Resource Partnership, Centerville Creek, and at the university, of course. He applied his vast knowledge of computers to write programs and create water testing instruments that would provide clear, easy, accessible information about the quality of our waters. The phrase I often heard was, "Hey, Mary, I'm going to the creek." There. Russ worked for countless hours building and testing an affordable system of water sampling. The rain events were always big events at our house. Without a doubt, the project that he loved the most was working with students and the professor here at UW Manitowoc. He eagerly awaited those summer weeks and spent the year improving his computer programs and displays the intern sampling results. His goal was to help the students use the results of their work in the creeks and the lab to tell a story. To Russ, the thousands and thousands of numbers that resulted from sampling were much more than statistics on charts. They were a story about the community that needed to know about the health of our waterways. May this story continue with the spirit of dedication, joy, and hope. Thank you all for being here. Now we want to open the floor up to any questions that might be in the audience.
Yeah, I do have a question, and I should know this.
That's okay.
You're looking at the graphs in 2021 as a restoration, there's not, like, the line doesn't connect.
Oh, yeah. My apologies. I should have explained that a bit better. So in 2021, we did not sample all 3 sites within the restoration. We only sampled that last site, CRO1, I believe it is. So that's why we don't have that data.
Right, those sites weren't very well accessible at that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I see, due to some repairs. Restorations are never finished.
That's true.
Questions?
Well, it looks like everyone understood everything.
Dave's got a question.
Questions, thanks everybody for all your hard work and especially going out and swatting all the mosquitoes and everything. All the muddy boots and the waders and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah. Oh, can't forget that.
Well, you know, someone has to keep the mosquitoes fed.
But, hats off to you, great work. I'm the county conservationist for Manitowoc County. It's good to see that there's people doing this kind of work. Take this work to heart and integrate it into our land and water plan for the next 10 years, for the efforts in restoring waterways and reducing the erosion of phosphorus and nitrates in groundwater and all wildlife and habitat work. So thank you for that. One clarification was on the color of Green Bay. It's one of the largest estuaries in the world. But the reason it's called Green Bay is not, it may be called Green Bay not because of the algae, but when it was first settled, when the settlers came here and come into the bay, the reason it was Green Bay is because the shores were lined with wild rice and emergent vegetation. That's why it was called Green Bay. So it's a little tidbit for you. And there are restoration efforts to try to bring that back. So.
Yes. I did that.
Some of our high school scholars who were, I think, here tonight, got to participate in some wild rice restoration, so that's great. All right, my turn. Don't worry, don't worry. I'm not gonna tell you to change your breath. So I'm actually going to do my best to channel Russ, and because something he always asked was, you've told us a lot about impacts on the stream and the environment. What would you say, maybe some of the impacts of this project on you are, and what would you like if someone came up and said, well, why bother doing this work? What would you say?
Do we just want?
Anyone and everyone can answer.
Okay.
I've always been told when you're searching for a career and like doing like these like jobs, whether they're like part-time, full-time, summer internships, whatever, it's a lot more meaningful when you know that you're making an impact on not just the community, but quite frankly, I mean, it spreads farther than that. I mean, these waters lead to Lake Michigan. By improving these streams, you're improving the quality of a lot of lives just outside of that. So that's my take on it.
My take is very similar, like everything is connected to anything. So this water will eventually go back into our drinking water. And it affects our crops, our animals, our entire ecosystem. So I think it's overall very important to know how things work and what is going into Lake Michigan, the second biggest freshwater source.
For me, I just get a lot of joy from working directly, like in these streams, literally in the streams. And it's just, it means a lot to me to be able to, have an internship, have a job where I'm able to be outside and do this work and do this data collection. And it's like a big puzzle to me that I want to show the result of to everyone.
The big thing for me is making sure that this is something that people can enjoy generations in the future. I mean, most of us grew up enjoying freshwater resources, whether it be, you know, for fishing or boating, whatever it was. Making sure that that's still the Great Lakes. We're known for it. Let's keep it that way.
Yeah, and something I would say definitely is, first off, it's really cool. So, I mean, of course, who doesn't enjoy that? Getting their feet wet every single day. But I mean, of course, our water systems are essential for life in the area. Without water, life cannot exist. So to help those waterways maintain their health is super important for us.
Thank you.
Of course.
I should add, when he says get our feet wet, he literally does mean get our feet wet. Later,
We really tried to.
Yeah.
Some new ones, so if you want to.
Yeah.
Fran. You're always welcome back, Natalie.
Will the new waders help me not fall into the stream?
Yeah.
I did that.
Yeah, that's how that works.
For sure, for sure.
Other questions for our stream team 2024?
Sure, with the runoff of roadways with petroleum, is that in consideration of boating oil, leave on water?
Well, yeah, that carries nutrients all in there too. I'm not exactly sure what nutrients, but that definitely does affect the health of the stream.
Yeah, for the chloride from street salt.
we did not.
We're unfortunately limited in our time and resources, so.
Yeah.
But there are some, like Valders was doing some testing of that, high school, there's been some work in the area. So hopefully that can pick up again too, but I think seeing the impact of rain events on Little Manfox River in those urban areas makes me think that there's, you know, there's probably some impact as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, my question kind of segues off of that slightly, just after doing this and focusing on phosphorus and pH and ammonia turbidity things, is there any other water quality tests you guys would be interested in having LWI kind of expand to in the future?
Oh, excellent question.
Yeah, I like that question. So
Yes, I'm already mad at her.
Personally, I actually have another internship with Glacial Lakes Conservancy based out of Sheboygan, and we have tested. Well, okay, so basically they tasked me with, hey, here's this expensive YSI multi-pro, figure out how to use it, go test these waters, and I found that conductivity says a lot about the quality of water. I mean, it could, like she said, lead to like how much salt could be in the streams and a lot of other ions. I know nitrate, I did hear, I think you mentioned nitrate, somebody mentioned nitrate, that was be another one I'd personally be interested in seeing as well. Yeah.
I have one that I would really like to be able to test for specifically, and that would be iron.
Mhm.
Because over the summer, we had, was it one or two samples?
It was a couple.
It was I thought it was a couple,
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure.
You left.
We had a couple of samples that after autoclaving turned this like orangish weird color, which caused our like phosphorus readings to be absolutely through the roof with them. I think we got a phosphorus reading of 13 point something. And keep in mind, the phosphorus standard is 0.075. So huge. And one of the things that we're like, oh, it might be is iron in the water, because that would kind of explain the orangey color, but we don't know because we don't have the equipment to test for that. So especially if it happens again next summer, I think that would be a really valuable test kit to have. So we can just kind of find more answers to little puzzles such as that.
And one thing to keep in mind, with iron too, is if I'm remembering correctly, it does oxidize when exposed to the air. So seeing those levels might be kind of interesting depending on how far it like. But yeah,
Could be iron bacteria too.
Very weird.
Yeah.
Just fun day in the lab.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you were testing at the sites, did you oftentimes go out and frequent the same site each time? So like, for example, would you go and test at one site many times? You're the same person? Or did you have different sites that you would go to?
So every Monday when we tested,
Yeah.
we had the same sites that we went to. We split into two teams, like a morning team and an afternoon time team. Since there were so many sites, so we each kind of split up and did those sites. So it was the same consistent teams and we went to the same sites every morning and we tried to even stay within the same location, specifically in the creek. We tried to get it as close to the same every week as possible. Was that your question?
Yeah, so the
Okay.
reason I asked that is I'm just wondering, like, especially in the restoration area. The water chemistry is amazing and really kudos to you guys for how you displayed it, but like, what else did you see? I mean, did you see changes in the wildlife? Did you see changes in fish, benthic macroinvertebrates? You know, I'd just be curious. The data is amazing, but I'd just be curious of what other observations you guys have, what changes do you see? Because you oftentimes don't get to go to the same site frequently over a period of time, right?
Yeah, I think it would be wonderful to in future years incorporate more like visual observations into our presentations. That wasn't something we did very like in depth this year, just because we are limited to our time and resources, unfortunately. There were some like minor changes that we saw. For example, we didn't really see a lot of wildlife in the restoration, which also we weren't really looking very carefully for it. But those visual observations could absolutely be something that in future years would be fascinating to look in on and get some more in depth.
One of the things we do have them do is make notes on their data spreadsheets. We have a notes column for anything unusual they do see. And for a one team's project or presentation, it's kind of hard to incorporate a lot of those. But one really interesting thing we're noticing is we tend to see some of these same unusual observations come up. For example, there's a strange chemical smell at this site always in the beginning of the sampling season or something like that. We are starting to see when we look back at those notes year after year, similar trends. So we're hoping, once we kind of get a handle on what those trends might be, that future teams could do some more of those observational and qualitative data in addition to the quantitative, yeah.
Well, one of the things that I was always curious about, which Russ was completely uninterested in, was, I believe that one of the, and it goes along with what you were saying, I think one of the, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the ways of testing water quality is to look at all those little invertebrates, because the invertebrates and the vertebrates, if they're not there, of course, you're in real trouble. And why is, I know why he didn't like it, because he didn't want to play with those. I'm curious why it isn't just a very basic part of any water. Why is your emphasis on what it is, and why do the little living things not enter into this? Do you not like to touch them?
So the wave monitoring, which is Water Action Volunteer Network, which is statewide,
Yeah.
does macroinvertebrates, and it's certainly an indicator of healthy, non-healthy streams. We're really looking at the total maximum daily load, the TMDL, and the 9 key element plans, and that's phosphorus and sediment loads. So that's really kind of where the focus has always been. It also takes a lot of time to do macroinvertebrate analyses, because you're gonna have to sort, you're gonna have to identify, you're gonna have to count. it's a good 3 hours just to do one sample.
Oh,
okay.
yes, so
Time.
it's time for these guys, but we are accomplishing that goal in different ways. So what we have is, classes at UW Green Bay Manitowoc campus that are out in these streams monitoring the aquatic invertebrates. So that's a really approachable lab that students can do in an intro to environmental science course, and they can do a more robust analysis in ecology. So we have both of those classes out, monitoring the streams of interest, to gather those data in different ways.
That's very interesting.
Yes.
Well, and with the, in Brown County, we have the Lower Fox River Watershed Monitoring Program, big long acronym. But in that program, we have all those different high schools. I'm in a high school, but we do Ashwaubenon Creek, which was one of my people. And then in that protocol, we do the water quality like they did. We do conductivity, which is fascinating. And then we also have to do the medics. So I find in the spring, usually I go out and I get the macroinvertebrates and bring them in the classroom. Because, yeah, that's a hoot. Something. So, but it takes time, like they said, and it takes time, you have to figure out what it is. And then in the spring, a lot of them are different invertebrates and they're in different larval or nymph phases. And you gotta figure out what they are. So it's time consuming, but it's very, informative because what's living there, they tell you what's going on.
I had a quick question about the little man because, some friends and I like to paddle it and it's really hard. Like, it was really low, it was like muck. And I didn't look closely enough when you showed the points on the little man that I know I was going to have, cause I'm the wave coordinator for Manitowoc County and I was gonna have somebody monitor on this one spot on the little Manitowoc and it was disgusting. It honestly smelled bad. It was like goo this thick. So anyway, did you notice like this summer? Cause I know one of my friends who likes to paddle it a lot, he was like, no, it's like goo.
Little Manitowoc compared to the others is a dream.
Really?
Yeah, the other ones are so gross.
Yeah, okay, because, you know, the little man's had that restoration work done once you get beyond the last bridge, but then like it was really low part of this summer.
We
So I
only
was
measured
wondering.
so far in.
Yeah.
So where we tested, it was not bad at all.
Okay, you're farther upstream actually, oh wait.
We're right by the lake.
Oh, you're right by it. Our-
We're
most
like-
upstream site is by the dog park on B.
Oh,
So that's our farthest. Yep, okay, and that's actually the part that we paddle, we paddle level.
That's relatively high usually.
Yes.
Usually at least above our waist.
Okay.
I was gonna ask about on the little Manitowoc, because we were talking about the E. coli.
Yeah.
And I was wondering about the proximity of the dog parks to the watershed. So I was trying to figure out where the E. coli would be coming from. And then I was looking, on my phone to see the dog parks and where it was. And there's like a zoo close to that and, it was right.
Oh, yeah,
How are the geese?
so many.
It's yummy.
Yeah, just talking about some of these sampling sites, I'm curious if there's any rhyme or reason to how the sampling site locations are decided upon.
There.
Yeah.
Question, so a lot of it, is based on accessibility, so it needs to be accessible, so a lot, you know, is publicly accessible or homeowners or private citizens who are allowing us that, but, you know, for example, sometimes it's grown out of the questions we've asked, so when we started this project, what was it, over a decade ago? We had 5 sites, and they were really the 3 sites, on one creek, on Centerville Creek, there were the 3 sites in that restoration area, and then just the most, I guess you'd say, close to the restoration area sites on that north and south branch. And we thought, well, this will capture everything, and we quickly realized we were not capturing everything that was going on. So we just kind of kept moving upstream so we could try to capture as much of the watershed as possible. So each question, because we're really looking at restorations, one thing, so mentioned Little Manitowoc River recently had a restoration. Pine Creek is having multiple, management strategies be employed shortly, so they kind of are on ground floor of that. So we kind of try to position them upstream, downstream within those areas. Well, yeah, lots of different things go into it.
Yeah, and one of the really nice things about these streams is you can, Centerville, they're capturing the entire watershed. So, in that limited geographic area, those sample sites, the most upstream dry up in the summertime. So we're getting all the water that's flowing through there. Pine, we've expanded, so to ask the questions about as, Soil and Water Conservation Department employs strategies, how does that affect water quality? Yeah, it's just grown from the questions being asked.
Can you take this information to the DNR and do they, work with you on solving some of these problems?
I can.
Yeah, it's the big.
Data, part of the TMDL modeling, so all of this data goes to the DNR. The reason they do all the quality assurance is because typically we would have to go through a certified lab. They are so good at quality control, this is as good as any certified lab in the state. So yes, the DNR gets the data and they use the data.
And they use the data. Good enough. That's like our program too, our data gets fed to UWGB from the high schools, and then that's going into like all the applications for the NERV and the estuary and things like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a lot of citizen science.
She mentioned wave monitoring too, that also gets entered into the DNR.
Well, I think, time is getting late, and if there's further questions, please feel free to stick around and talk to the students, talk to us. But the one thing I'd like to say is Russ would be really proud of you guys because you took your data and you told a story. And I think the audience really appreciated the story that was told, and I know Russ would as well. So thank you guys. Thank you all for attending.
We can have some more snacks as well.
Yeah.
Especially students here. No, I am Dana.
You're great.
Thank you.